Hey, hey.
We're early.
I know. Look at that. That never
I
happens.
didn't know how long it was going to last.
That's all right. Better early. Who cares? It balances out for the times that we've been late in the past. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from. This is the Awesome Journey, and I am your host, Kelle 𝒔𝒏𝒆𝒚, along with my co-hosting here, Christy Howard. And yeah, as you can see, we just have our new intro. So hence not really knowing how long it was going to go with the back end stuff. But hey, we're here nonetheless. And you guys, today's episode is actually quite special because it's the source of where Christy and I met, which is kind of crazy how things come full circle and are just truly very surreal. Um, for those of you that know, and those of you that don't, Christy and I connected on LinkedIn 15 years ago, but we met in person at a charity event. And a mutual friend introduced us because I was very involved in nonprofits and doing large scale events and fundraising. And Christy was doing a large scale fundraiser here in Scottsdale for Brian Terry. Which is about the Fast and Furious operation, which we will be talking about today with our guest, Mr. Peter Forcelli, which you guys, we are so stoked to have him here. It is a privilege, honor, all the things. For those of you that aren't familiar with Peter and his background, he is a retired ATF Deputy Assistant Director, a former NYPD homicide detective, and an author of his new book that is coming out on March 5th, The Deadly Path, how Operation Fast and Furious and bad lawyers armed the Mexican cartels. And I'm pretty sure the latter will soon have best-selling preceding it. So congratulations on that. And also, so everyone knows, I included the links to his book to do pre-orders in the pre-promo on the event, and I will be doing it on the post-promos as well. And you can go to his website and you can get an autographed copy that is personalized to you. And I will also include that link as well. You guys, you need to get a cup of coffee, tea, adult beverage, whatever you wish, and listen to this one today. As an Arizona girl, man, I've learned a lot just by truly even just listening to some of the most recent interviews that Peter has done. And he's an incredible example, I think, of what the world just needs more of. You know, truth seems like something so simple, but too many people aren't willing to stand up for the truth. And he did. In a post I made yesterday, I used a line that he said is, when you have truth on your side, you should fight ferociously. And I love that. And man, did you. So God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. And so we can spend as much time with Peter today and his story, because y'all, it's going to be great. I guarantee it. I will turn it over to my co-host in care, who, again, we all met from this event, which is kind of crazy. Christy Howard.
Hello. Okay. Peter. Okay. Tilt your camera down a bit. Your comments are cutting off your chin. Me, I don't really care.
How's that? Is that better, folks?
Excellent.
Let's see,
right.
Dan. How's that? Me? It's
Excellent.
no big deal. Okay, that's
Thanks,
better.
Dan.
There you go. Thank you, Dan.
Keep me in check.
Yes. So, gosh, how many years ago was that? 15, whatever.
So crazy.
So, yes, I did an event to honor Brian Terry, who I never met, because the whistleblowers were blowing the whistle on Fast and Furious, and some lawyers and the president, and we can go all into that. Here, while I was living in Scottsdale. And unfortunately, we didn't know about it because the media tends to hang out with whoever they want to hang out with, of not telling the truth. We know how that is. And what Pete did was he stood up for the truth. And that's a very scary place to be, because what happens is when a government says, come on, whistleblowers, tell us what's going on. We even get that with corporations. Come and tell us what's going on. You tell them, and then you get thrown underneath the bus and splattered, and then some. So, Pete, start with just where you started in New York and how you got to where you are. And, you know, 9/11 is close to our hearts. I lost 7 people, 7 dear friends. I was there in the 94 bombing, living in New York. But it's something that people tend to forget. We all came together, but we forgot. Well, we didn't. Other people.
I was going to say, we didn't.
No, we never did.
Yeah, sure.
So anyway, It's the stage is yours. You know, everybody knows I interrupt when I see messages or I want to go another place because that's just what I do. I'm the older one. I'm allowed
Well,
to.
first, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. But yeah, look, I started my law enforcement career back in 1987. I was 20 years old. Started back before Giuliani merged the three police departments together. Back in the day, there was a housing authority police department, a transit authority police department, and the NYPD. Took the same test, went to the same academy. I got picked for housing, which was originally disappointing because I wanted to be an NYPD cop. But it turned out to be a great job. Looking back on my 35-year career, it's the most fun I had during that 35 years. Walk the beat in the project, sometimes alone. So you learn how to deal with people. You know, you learn how to de-escalate things. You know, you also learn that when necessary, you had to use force because if you didn't, then folks would take advantage of you, push you around. So it was an interesting growth experience. And then after a few years doing that, I got promoted to the detective squad. And then Giuliani merged the three departments together, and I was fortunate enough to stay in the detective bureau. And initially, I was in the 47th Precinct Detective Squad, which was a great place to learn because in 1995, when the merge happened, they led the city in homicide. So it was baptism by fire, so to speak. And a couple of years later, I was brought into the Bronx Homicide Task Force, where I spent roughly the last 5 years of my career. And it was there that I started working with federal agencies, worked with ATF and DEA extensively, worked with the FBI from time to time. And I found the DEA and ATF folks were more like cops than the FBI folks, a little different. The culture in the FBI is a little bit more structured. And forgive me, you know, I had some really great friends in the bureau, but I found the culture to be almost like cult-like, like it was the bureau, where the folks in the other agencies seemed to be more interested in the mission. So, you know, working with those folks, I saw that I was, you know, working a lot of overtime, missing time with my family, seeing things I didn't like to see, a lot of kid homicides, you know, a lot of teenage and youth related violence. And we were doing a lot of gun cases in order to charge people federally for possession of firearms when they were misusing them in the Bronx, because the Bronx DA's office wasn't keeping anybody in jail, kind of like the trend that we're seeing now. So crime was out of control. So by taking these folks and prosecuting them federally, you know, not only were they looking at a bigger sentence, a lot of them would come in and cooperate and give up information, which led to a treasure trove of intelligence just going out there, because you don't take what they say at face value. You got to go out and corroborate it. So, I mean, it was just like running down the leads and putting the puzzle pieces together. It was so much fun. And that was the part of being an investigator that I loved. Like, I know that you ladies have some friends who were undercovers. That was never an area where I was very good at or very strong in. I was more the guy in the interview room. But it was that actually led me to jump ship and go to ATF. So I was an ATF agent in New York. Started there in June of 2001. So I just nearly completed 15 years of service with the NYPD, just a little shy. And so I was there for the World Trade Center attack, which happened at our offices were in 6 World Trade. So I spent 6 years there before I went out to Phoenix. But it was a great place to learn, work with some amazing people. I know cops, you know, right now there's certain folks who stigmatize cops as whatever. I found them to be some of the finest people I worked with in my entire life and people I really looked up to. It's funny because I learned the job from guys who were around in policing back in those days. Like when I first got into the detective bureau, I worked with folks who actually were on the job when Serpico was on the job.
Wow.
I mean, what a gift to be able to steal some of their experience and learn from that and just, you know, try to pass that on to the next generation of law enforcement too.
Yeah. And I just want to, you know, now that we're kind of transitioning over to Arizona is, you know, because obviously following 9/11, we all know what happened with that and being there and involved and, you know, having any kind of issue, of course, with survivor's guilt. Wow, that was easy for me to say. Uh, which you've talked about some, and then wanting, you know, all the PTSD and issues that went along with it, deciding to make a move to another area to get away from truly the stress or, you know, the situation I don't want to say starting over because it still comes with you, but starting fresh uh, with the intent of go to Arizona and it's going to start over and this not going to have any of this stress come with me. And then you come to Arizona and it's from the frying pan into the fire, for lack of a better term.
No,
But
I mean, who'd have thought?
I'm interrupting. I want to go back to, just to be quick, when 9/11 happened, you were now working with the ATF, correct?
Yes, Correct.
Okay. So how deep were you into the investigation because of the ATF with 9/11? Because you
Well,
do speak with them, a lot.
sure.
So how involved were you guys?
I speak at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum a few times a year. I speak to law enforcement agencies and leadership development schools about 9/11 because I think it's an important thing to never forget. Like, I mean, we say never forget. Half of our elected officials have clearly forgotten. It's
Yep.
another story. But I look, there wasn't really much of an investigation for the ATF side because we knew what happened. You know, the FBI did conduct a more thorough investigation into how it happened and the terrorist ties. That's outside of ATF's jurisdiction. So
Okay.
we assisted, but to be honest, the majority of our role was to help with the rescue and recovery effort. So I was there when I was not there when the first plane hit. I got there right before the second plane hit. In fact, I watched a young female Hispanic paramedic or EMT lose her life when the second plane hit from debris that fell from the South Tower.
Oh.
And then a little bit later in the day, I was standing across the street. For folks who know New York City, I was standing in front of Century 21, which is the department store there, looking at the South Tower when I saw three very close friends of mine, John Coughlin, who was a sergeant in the emergency service unit, Vinny Dans, who I came on the job with, who was a cop in the emergency service unit, and then this young cop named Walter Weaver, who used to come up to the detective squad room when I was a detective and just bullshit about watches and stuff like that. Good guy, just nice kid. So I was watching, them walk into the plaza in the South Tower when the South Tower fell. So and
Oh.
I ran north and I hit under a fire truck that ironically is in the museum, which is why I was first asked to speak there, which is weird because a fire truck is not going to carry the weight of a 115-story building.
Right.
So it was not the smartest move to hide under it, but I mean, it was what I did at the time.
Where else did you have to go?
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, but it was, and then when I got home later, a couple days later, I found out three more of my friends that were cops, and one fellow cop who became a fireman, Danny Harlan, had also passed. So like you, I lost 7 very good friends that day. I've lost about 21 since from 9/11 related illnesses, which is another whole story. But yeah, what happened was, first it was rough for me to get past living because the guys, those 3 people I mentioned, of the two of them, John Coughlin and Vinny Danch, tried out for the emergency service unit with me, and I got weeded out for fear of heights. They make you climb the Verrazano Bridge. I couldn't do it. So there was part of me that felt bad, like, hey, had I had the courage back in those days to climb that bridge tower, I would have been there with them. So like my survival
Right.
was something I had a hard time grappling with. And, back in those days, I had never missed a police funeral in New York City, or if it was in drivable distance, because I always felt it was my duty to pay respects to the fallen. And I couldn't bring myself to even go to the funerals of my friends because I just couldn't wrap my head around that I was still around. And then, working in New York as an agent, most of my work involved the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, which were great people. I love them. They were good friends, great cases coming out of there with them, thanks to them. And driving past that site all the time just ground me down. So, I tried to transfer out of New York as an agent, put in for a transfer to Paducah, Kentucky. I'm sure I would have fit in really well there and with my accent. And then I tried to transfer to a position in Tampa. And, it was hard to get out of New York unless you're promoted out. And I really didn't ever envision going into leadership. But I did. I put in for a leadership position in Savannah, Jacksonville, Dallas, and Phoenix. And I got picked for Phoenix thinking, you know what, I'll get away from the stress of driving past Ground Zero. While I was still in New York, there was an incident where I was driving home because for a period of time I lived in New Jersey, which is about a 2-hour drive. And I had wrenching chest pains. And I, driving probably about a half an hour from the hospital that I knew was the Central State Medical Center. And I thought to myself, hey, I'm having a heart attack. So what does a moron do when they think they're having a heart attack? They drive themselves to the hospital.
Of course.
Yeah, instead of stopping to call 911. And it was a toll plaza. I could have even asked for help there. But that was the first time when I went there. The doctors took the blood work. They did the EKG. And, the blood work, I didn't know this, but they could tell if you had a heart attack from your enzymes.
Yep.
And it was there the first time that a doctor and a nurse had suggested, hey, they ask you, what have you been through? What exposures have you had? And when I told them I was a 9/11 survivor, the first thing that came into their minds when there was nothing physically wrong with me was, you might have PTSD. And my response to them wasn't, look, I'm not a rude person by nature, but it wasn't a polite one because I always believed, hey, I'm the police. I don't ask for help. I'm the person that you come to for help. So I was in a bit of denial about not just being survivor's guilt, which I kind of accepted, but that I had some other things going on. So going out to Phoenix, I thought would help relieve some of that stress. And, so of the 4 cities I put in for, my luck, I got picked for Phoenix, and off I went.
Oh my gosh. And I think I read this somewhere, because talking about losing friends post 9/11 due to 9/11 illnesses, you yourself were also diagnosed with lung
Right.
cancer. Is that right? In
Yeah,
2018?
it was 2018. It was shortly before I was in charge of the Miami office at the time. It was shortly before the Parkland shooting that I actually wound up having my right lung removed. In fact, it was my first, probably about 2 months back to work, was the Parkland. And I remember walking that crime scene because it was massive, because all the police vehicles, so I had to walk about a half mile to get to where I was supposed to be. That when they turned on the camera for the first press conference I was involved in, I literally don't remember a word I said. All I can remember is thinking in my head, "Don't faint, don't faint,"
Mm.
because I was literally sucking wind so bad from walking not that far even,
Right.
that I didn't know if I'd be able to remain conscious. But yeah, that was another tough scene to go through. But yeah, I
Oh,
mean, I did wind up with lung cancer. Luckily, they took out the lung, all the cancer with it, so I didn't have to go
Yeah.
through chemo or radiation. So I was very lucky. And truth be told, my wife had given me bronchitis, and that's what led to me going to seek medical attention. Had she
Yeah.
not given me bronchitis, I wouldn't
You
have
would
known,
never
because I
know.
had no symptoms whatsoever,
Right.
nothing.
not
So,
crazy.
yeah.
Crazy.
To
God
thank to
bless
thank your
you.
to thank your spouse for getting you sick, but
Yeah.
really saving you.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've thanked her many times, because it's
Sure.
true. I wouldn't be here probably had she not given me bronchitis. Go
Right.
figure. God has his ways of looking down on you, right?
Oh,
Amen.
absolutely,
Oh,
absolutely. So you get to Phoenix,
yes.
and you're like, "I'm gonna just relax in the sun," and boom, what happens?
Well, truthfully, when I got to Phoenix, I was a little bit nervous because it was my first like supervisory experience. I was an agent, had 22 years of experience by the time I got to Phoenix, but I was always responsible for myself. Like, I didn't have to worry about supervising other people. So I wanted to go there and be a good boss, and be a good leader. So I went there with the intention on spending my first 90 days or so just kind of watching and observing and seeing how things worked. And very quickly, I saw that the way we did things in New York was vastly different than how things happened in Phoenix. Where in New York, if we saw something happen that was criminal in nature, and we would oftentimes make an arrest right there on the spot, call federal prosecutors. They would say, "All right, take them to whatever Bronx central booking. We'll draw up a criminal complaint, and you'll take them to see the magistrate tomorrow." Where in
Mhm.
Phoenix, when I first got there, the tone was, "Well, you know what? Let them go, and we can always indict it later." So we were stopping cars full of guns, heading to Mexico. We were seizing the guns back in the time when I was running the group that focused on firearms trafficking to Mexico, and we would constantly contact the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we would constantly be told, "Hey, just let them go. We'll indict it later." Well, case after case after case, I would see that those indictments, for the most part, and there were some exceptions, they weren't coming. Like the first one I'll talk about here, because I don't want to blow the book either, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
real
Yeah, yeah.
explicit examples in the book. But
Yeah, yeah.
my first work weekend in Phoenix, I get a call from one of my agents who got a call from a licensed gun dealer, a business, in which somebody walked into their store and wanted to buy 13 AK-47 variant rifles that they had. It was basically all that they had on the shelves. Now, these aren't AK-47s like you see in the movies. They're not the Kalashnikovs that are used in the Middle East. They're civilian versions of rifles. They're semi-automatic. They look like an AK-47, for whatever reason. And so what would happen is, so we roll out there, the dealer does the transaction while we're outside, so it's not going off somewhere else. They know that we're controlling that situation once those guns leave the door. We would then follow the vehicle. In this instance, we followed it, and then it got on I-10 South, and we stopped it. It was a U-Haul, and we pulled the two people out, gently, and we started asking them questions, and they contradict each other. So we did what cops do all over the country every single day. We're taking that information that the license dealer gave us, and we're building probable cause, only to be told in this instance, well, just take the guns and let them go. Well, those people were never indicted, and this
Right.
scenario would unfold again and again and again, which is the dealers would call us, right? So the dealers weren't selling it and calling us a day or two later. They would call us, and we would interdict the firearms, or they would call us, and if we were tied up with another stop or out on an operation, the dealers would be like, "Hey, you know something? We'll just tell them they didn't pass NICS. They have to come back tomorrow or come back the following day," so that we could be there to stop the
Mhm.
firearms, to make sure they weren't falling into the wrong hands. And then there were other times, like if we were just not available that week, they would just say, "All right, we're not selling to these folks." And this went on for many, many years, where most of the firearms that were being trafficked to the cartels, we were seizing them, which was not what was happening with Fast and Furious, but no one was getting prosecuted, which to me was it was the complete opposite of what I had dealt with for many, many years. First off, that 13 gun seizure, again, they weren't guns being trafficked to hunters or target shooters or sportsmen.
Right.
They were getting trafficked to cartel folks. That would have been the top story if that happened in New York City. It would have been #1 news. Arsenal of weapons found on whatever highway in Manhattan or the Bronx. And in Arizona, nobody gave a crap. And when I say nobody, I mean on the federal level, because
Yeah.
we often went to Maricopa County. Their prosecutors were great. They took cases. We even at some point, I built a relationship with the Arizona Attorney General's office, which is amazing because they didn't have a team that worked gun cases at all. And when I said, look, could we meet? Because I was banging my head against the wall with the U.S. Attorney's office, and I sat down with them and explained what we were dealing with. And they're like, yeah, we want to help you. So I was like, at the end of that meeting, I said, well, when can we start? And they're like, right away. I mean, they jumped in with both feet. But the people who were tasked with prosecuting these cases could not have cared less.
Do you think it's because,
Sure.
New York, when I lived in New York, I dated a guy that carried a gun because I couldn't bring a gun in because it was illegal. So I dated an agent. When you live in Arizona, you can carry guns. So do you think it's just sort of like, okay, well, you're going to see guns all the time, that they're just sort of more laxed about that? And were these what they call straw men that were going in and buying the guns and then pulling them in?
Sure. Well, look, I think it was more of, I've had a lot of time, over a decade, to think about this. And the only
Right.
conclusion I came up with in the beginning is they were lazy. They didn't want the cases. They didn't want the
Yeah.
caseload. But yeah, to your point, a straw purchaser can go into a gun store and buy a gun because they don't have a criminal history. They've never been in trouble, right? So they're not convicted felons. They're not drug abusers, or they shouldn't be, although we heard about a recent case where that came up. They're not dishonorably discharged veterans, so they can legally buy a firearm. So they go in and they do it with the purpose of transferring that to a trafficker or to a felon. Sometimes you would see that as well. But and the dealers would call us when they knew it was a straw purchase without fail. Now, the thing is, though, straw purchasing is an act of deception, because you're going there and you're basically lying to that dealer,
Right.
saying that I'm buying it for
Correct.
Christy, but I really
Right.
am buying it for Kelly, who's a felon.
Right.
So if the
Right.
dealer doesn't pick up on it, and that's why I get upset with some folks in the media today, they want to blame the dealer. It's not the dealer's
Yeah.
fault that the dealer gets lied to,
Right.
So, but without fail, they called us and we would interdict those firearms, but no one was going to jail. So we weren't stemming that flow to Mexico or to felons, because if I'm not going to charge you, then you can just keep buying. And people did. One of the buyers in Fast and Furious bought over 800 firearms, straw buyer, before
So
they felt he
nuts.
was worth charging. 800.
And I
And
thought I had
I'm
heard.
going to make a point though here, just for people to understand this and to get your insight on this, because one of the issues, or I would certainly think, is being someone, you're doing all this good, but nobody's getting prosecuted. And that happens, and we hear this a lot.
We now
What
see
that does to the morale of you and your team who are trying to do, and you're doing the same thing with the same people over and over and over again, and nothing's happened.
Well, it's worse than that, because here's the other thing, because there's
Sure.
another part of that relationship with federal prosecutors is, yes, when you're like in New York, we lock people up, and they were
Yeah.
looking at a lot of time, so they would flip and they would give us information, like I said before, about all this other crime. So I was solving more
how it
murders as
used
an
to be in
ATF
New
agent.
York. It's
Correct.
how it used to be in New York. It's not that way now.
Well, federally, they're still not bad. But I
Okay.
mean, so because these people didn't want to go to jail for a long time, they would flip. So we were doing RICO cases. We were doing continuing criminal enterprise. We were solving more. I solved more murders as an ATF agent than I did as a homicide detective,
Wow.
because of that information we were getting. So when you're not charging people, you're not being able to work your way up the chain in those criminal organizations. So that wasn't happening in Phoenix. But then the other thing is, my agents, like here I am, and I was tasked with the role of being their leader, and I take that position seriously, because you have an effect on your people. You have an effect on their life at work and also at home, because if they're happy at work, they'll be better at home. And I watch my agents do things right again and again and again, but they can never make it to that next level because they couldn't get the subpoena, or they couldn't get the court order, or they couldn't interview the suspect because the U.S. Attorney's office didn't want to bring the person in. So what happens then is you're watching your agents never meet their full potential because of stuff that's beyond their control. And then the other thing is there's another thing that's important to keep in mind too is, you know, I had a good relationship with the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York to the point where I had a desk in the Southern District. When I got to Phoenix, I wanted that for my agents, but I also had good relationship with the attorneys. So every now and then I would do meet and greets with the new assistant U.S. attorneys that would get hired. And a lot of them came from Maricopa County Attorney's Office or City of Phoenix Attorney's Office. And these people were great people who came in exuberant, like, wow, I made it to the big time. I'm a federal prosecutor now, right?
Yeah.
And so, which I welcomed. I thought it was great. And then I would slowly watch them become disillusioned because they wanted to do good, but that office's politics and that office's policies didn't allow them to. So they would be beaten down. So you're watching these people who you kind of feel that you have a need to help them out and to develop themselves and to get further in their careers, whether it be agents or prosecutors. And you're realizing that that's not going to happen because of things that are beyond their control, things that are really driven by the U.S. Attorney's Office, which was incredibly frustrating for me as a new leader, trying to be a good manager to my people.
So I'm as I usually do. How is your mental health during all this?
Yeah.
Because now you've left New York, you realize with PTSD, your mental health, you just thought you were going to go to the sunny Phoenix and relax. And now you're dealing with all this red tape bullshit. How is that? Or did you just like bull through it and just say, okay, I'm just going to push through
I was still in denial that I had PTSD, number one. And I did feel a little bit better that I wasn't driving past the 9/11 memorial every day. I didn't have those memories popping up every day, but there still were nights where I'd go to sleep. Look, you don't lose the sights that you saw there. You don't unhear the sound of those bodies that for the folks that jumped out of the buildings hitting the ground. I still hear those sounds sometimes. But, I was so focused on the job that I was not taking care of myself. And I was so engaged in the fight to try to get my folks to be able to do their cases and get things right. And look, part of that was partially because of what I saw on 9/11. Like I saw guys that I loved lose their lives and they were doing it in the pursuit of their job, right? These guys, they gave their lives in pursuit of being good cops. Here I am, I'm a new manager of special agents in Phoenix, thinking we're doing the right thing by trying to stop bad people from arming cartels with guns. So I felt like those guys didn't give up when they ran into that tower.
Right.
I think I'm going to give up fighting the fight to get these cases prosecuted because people are getting slaughtered in Mexico with these guns for the ones where the dealers aren't identifying the straw purchasers because they're not obvious. So I felt like it was a duty to try to make a difference there. And so, but at that point, my mental health was probably not great but it was also, I was so caught up in the fight that I wasn't like sitting around feeling sorrowful, but it wasn't a good state to be in either.
So for people that don't even know what Fast and Furious is, it's not the movie with a bunch of cars going fast.
Not about fast cars.
So it has to do with the gun running, but it was our government that put the guns to the dealers to sell to the straw men to put into the cartel. So then they would get tracked, correct?
Well, it's a little bit different, but it's not to excuse anything. So like I was saying before, when the dealers would call us before Operation Fast and Furious, we would seize the guns, right? So the dealers would give those guns to the traffickers or straw purchasers, knowing those guns were going to not make it to the street where they could be pointed at some cop or some kid or used in a home invasion robbery. So what happened is in 2009, late 2009, Phoenix led the country in home invasion robberies and kidnappings. And that's kind of the kind of work that I did in New York as an agent. I worked on a lot of home invasion cases. So my group's focus was tasked with dealing with those things. And then what had happened is they stood up a brand new group, Phoenix Group 7, and Phoenix Group 7's job became dealing with firearms being trafficked to Mexico. Now, in that case, what happened was instead of stopping the cars and seizing the guns, they were letting the guns go. Now, look, doesn't excuse anything because you're allowing guns that are going to the cartels to go to the cartels. So the government didn't supply the guns, but what they didn't do was interdict the guns. But it gets worse. So the dealers, like I said, they used to call us, and what happens is guns get traced from crime scenes. So what happens is they'll get the serial number, they'll call the manufacturer, say, hey, Smith and Wesson, or hey, whoever, did you make this gun? Yes, I did. Who did you send it to? Well, I sent it to Christie's distributorship. Okay, Christy, they'll call Christy. This is all phone calls. There's no database.
Right.
Christy, what did you do with that gun? Well, I sold it to Kelly. She's a gun store in, say, Yuma. So they call Kelly. Kelly, can you tell us what happened with that firearm? Well, I sold it to whoever the buyer was, right? So, and that's a trace. So then they know who straw bought it. You can go interview that person. Normally, that's what would happen, is that person would get interviewed if it turns up at a crime scene. Well, they weren't doing that either. But so what was happening is the dealers went from not getting the guns that they were selling traced to all of a sudden now their guns are starting to get traced at some pretty heinous crime scenes in Mexico. And this is before Brian Terry's murder. So the dealers start calling ATF and saying, hey, listen, we don't feel safe continuing to sell these guns because we trusted you folks to be interdicting them. And we're starting to get phone calls that they're turning up at various crime scenes. So what happens is ATF agents involved in that case. And the weird thing is the rest of us didn't even know this was going on, which we'll get into later about one of the reasons why I wrote the book. So the people from that group met with the prosecutors, right? And the gun dealers' lawyers were there, and the U.S. Attorney's Office was there, federal prosecutors. And they tell these gun dealers, no, you're working with us, continue to sell, right? So that here you have civilian gun dealers decide we're not doing this anymore. We don't want to do this anymore. They're appalled by the carnage happening in Mexico. And you have DOJ employees telling them, no, go ahead, keep doing it. And the numbers were going up. Like I remember the first meeting that I attended where we were questioning, hey, how come you're not stopping these straw buyers? The numbers were around 600. By the time Brian Terry died, the numbers were over 1,000. And myself and a couple other people were pushing back, again, still not knowing what the whole thing that was going on was. Right. And then Brian Terry got killed, heroically patrolling the desert looking for drug robbery crews. And an agent in that group named John Dodson, who knew what was happening, stepped forward and called Senator Grassley's office. And originally we were told John Dodson's lying. They're not walking guns. And I was actually at one meeting where apparently the U.S. Attorney's Office was really upset with John Dodson for stepping forward. And Bill Newell, who was the SAC at the time, said, hey, don't be surprised if John Dodson doesn't get himself indicted. Yep. And that's when I decided this is bullshit, pardon my language, because for all of those traffickers that we recommended for prosecution that got a pass, and they're going to indict an agent who blew the whistle. And it was that following morning that I called Senator Grassley's office and stepped forward myself saying, hey, I know you're being told by the U.S. Attorney's Office and by ATF that John Dodson's lying. He's not lying. And look, the reality is I didn't know John Dodson. I don't know that I ever even had a conversation with John up until much later. But the whole concept of indicting an agent who's doing the right thing and letting those traffickers go time and time and time again was unconscionable to me.
So for people who don't know about the, Brian was a BORTAC border agent, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while. Border agents get paid shit to begin with, but didn't he have a gun that was bean bags? Like they didn't have bullets.
The BORTAC is an amazing unit. In fact, in a recent school shooting, if you remember, it was BORTAC that pushed past the cops in Uvalde and said, hey, those folks are incredibly highly trained. Great,
but they don't get paid shit.
They get paid crappy. The work conditions that they work in are some of the most hostile on the planet. But no, they're armed. But because of the nature of the work they were doing, they had beanbag weapons, but they also had actual weapons. And I think that Brian didn't realize that he was dealing with people who were as heavily armed as they were. Right. And normally when you use force in law enforcement, despite what some folks think the cops go out there and want to kill everybody, there's an escalation. And usually it's physical force, then like less lethal weapons like a beanbag gun or a taser. And then finally deadly force. And based on the training that those guys get, my assumption would be that Brian probably didn't realize that he was dealing with as big a group and that some of them had AK-47 variant rifles, because with his training and experience, if he knew he was facing deadly force, he wouldn't have resorted to the beanbag. But again, that's training, and you're in the desert at night.
Yeah, it was at nighttime.
Yeah, so tragic.
And wasn't there a second agent with him out of Texas?
They work in teams. Later. Yeah, they work in teams.
But wasn't there another agent that got killed by the Fast and Furious guns? He was
There,
out in Texas. It was an
But there was a
ICE guy, I
Texas
think.
agent there too.
Jaime Zapata was killed in
yeah.
Mexico with a gun that was trafficked in a case that was similar to Fast and Furious. See, but that's the other thing that happened is like, and this is why another reason getting into the politics and why I wrote the book is when, look, Fast and Furious, that case was actually called Jacob Chambers et al., which is like Latin for and others. And it wasn't called Fast and Furious. That was a nickname that was given to it by agents that were involved in that case and the prosecutors. But you know, so when that broke, that case started and ended during the Obama administration, right? It started and ended there.
Thank
The
you.
Democrat side was turning around saying, "Well, no, this was a continuation of another program called a wide receiver." These are all political talking points. None of that is true. Wide receiver was another case that was a bit of a shit show that was run out of the Tucson groups. But none of the agents that were involved in Fast and Furious were involved in wide receiver. The command staff in Phoenix that was involved in wide receiver was long gone. These were separate programs. So what happened is you get these politicians coming in, making up stories to divert attention from what was really going on there. And look, it doesn't excuse Eric Holder or Obama or any of those folks, nor does it excuse the Bush administration from the earlier thing, because when something bad happens on your watch, you own it. And then you have a duty to fix it and hold people responsible, and they didn't do any of the above. So, so that's just to clarify. Well, Project Gunrunner was actually Project Gunrunner was something that came about to get money for ATF that led to opening offices in Yuma and other things. But it amazed me how people would just bold-faced lie about one thing or the other to try to, point
cover themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So John Dotson whistleblows. Newell, who's now probably in a high office somewhere smoking a good cigar. And then you come up and you're like, this is bullshit. John's telling the truth.
Right.
And where does it go? I mean, we're not giving away. You guys have to read this book. Trust me.
I'm not talking about everything in the book. Believe me, I got to leave some suspense for it.
I know, I got it. I don't, but
There's so much
just
more.
an idea of just how,
Bill Newell was still in place for a short time after I spoke to the Grassley's folks. And then what happened was once word got out that other people were talking, Bill Newell and the two assistant special agents in charge, Jim Needles and George Gillette, got removed. And Jim Needles had nothing to do with the case itself. He was actually a really good investigator, mentor to me, good man. So they brought in a whole new command staff. So shortly after that happened, I got actually handed a subpoena and I was deposed by staffers from Senator Grassley's office, Senator Leahy's office, because he was the chairman of Judiciary at the time, Darrell Issa, who was the chairman of Oversight, and Elijah Cummings' office. He was the ranking member of Oversight. So none of the politicians were there, just their staff. And this was a deposition that went on for about 6-7 hours. And I laid everything on the table because, look, you can't fix what you're not going to talk about. So everything, this case, other cases, the declinations I spoke of earlier. There was another case with a guy who was making grenades for the Sinaloa cartel that the U.S. Attorney's Office refused to prosecute. I put it all on the table. And this was in a room that was rented by the staff in a hotel, not a hotel room, but like a small meeting room. And so then I walked back after literally the day of that deposition. I walked back to my office, which was about a 6 blocks, walk, not very far. And before I even got to my actual office itself, my phone rings. And it's a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office who was a good person, one of the ones I got along with. And he said, "Hey, Pete, I just got to give you a heads up about something." He said, "I know you just got deposed," which is interesting. How do you know? He's like, everything that you told the U.S. Attorney, everything that you told the Senate staffers in that room was relayed to the U.S. Attorney, who's the chief federal law enforcement officer for the state of Arizona, Dennis Burke. And I'm like, oh, shit, okay, all right. And I assume it was Senator Leahy's staff because he was the chairman of Judiciary. And when I was later getting my teeth kicked in, it was him and his staff who were the only ones that wouldn't pick up the phone because I didn't want to turn it into a political thing for me. Because if you're a whistleblower, the last thing you want to be perceived as is being political. So if I had a complaint, I called all 4 offices and certain offices answered, certain didn't. Leahy's team never once picked up the phone, never once even made up an excuse as to why they couldn't get involved. So that happened day one before I even got back to my office. And then the following day, I get it may have been a day after that, actually. I get a call from another prosecutor saying, "Hey, man, we need to sit down and have coffee." I'm like, okay. So they hand me an email that Dennis Burke had sent out to his staff saying, anyone having contact with Pete Forcelli, even if it's seeing him having coffee with his family on the weekend, it is to be reported to me through your chain of command immediately. Wow. So I was like, I haven't even testified in front of open Congress yet, and I'm a marked man. So it
Yeah.
got weird, and then other things happened. I got surveilled, so which led to me not using my phone to talk to my lawyers. I wouldn't email because I didn't want them to pull my emails. So I mean, eventually I wound up almost bankrupt, but I wound up in a point where I had to sell things to pay the not illicit items like watches and shit that I acquired over many years.
Yet you moved from New York
I
to
know.
take care of your mental health because you were there for 9/11, overseeing the destroying of our country, and you come over to Phoenix, sunny Phoenix, and our government is kicking you to the curb because you're telling the truth. You're taking their mask off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's just say it was not a wise move. But yeah, I tried to get away from stress, wound up getting into even more stress. But I mean, look, so I sold things, made the mortgage payment one month, sold more jewelry, that I had other watches to make the next one. Had a yard sale, which was the most humbling experience of my life. I got to pay the mortgage, got a mortgage coming up. We don't have the money because we paid all the lawyers, and my wife had a knee replacement at the time, so we had medical bills. So I literally, you're standing there, right, selling I loved working with my hands, had power tools, and you're standing there trying to sell a power drill for $25, getting talked down to like $10 by somebody. And it's like, do I sell it? Well, I really need to pay the rent. The mortgage. It was the most humbling experience of my life. But luckily, when Bill Newell got removed, he was replaced by a guy named Tom Brandon, who later became AATF's deputy director, who literally, he handed me a challenge coin, a St. Michael challenge coin. And I have to give credit where it's due. He said, Pete, as long as you're telling the truth, I have your back. And he did. So while I was getting my teeth kicked in, and it could partially be why I survived, because as you know, most whistleblowers are bankrupted, divorced, they lose their jobs. I clung on to my job because he gave me the space to defend myself. Like, he didn't necessarily fight for me, but he didn't come looking for me with a sledgehammer when I was defending my reputation. So him giving me that space, I attribute to me actually having the ability to survive and make it through the rest of my career. But it was humbling. But even by that point, I had not even by then come to terms with PTSD or any of that stuff. That came much later, around the time of my lung cancer.
Wow. And just the exacerbation of all of that. And how, I mean, God bless your family, because that had to be so difficult just for them to watch what was happening to you, and then also going through it, because they were ruthless
Yeah.
on your treatment. And I mean, God bless that. But how was that with, your wife obviously going through medical events? Because that had to be a strain, and that is one of those things. You either unite and come out better, or it is divisive, which is their whole point. That's why they do it, is they want to destroy you, everything.
Oh, it was difficult. And look, my wife's a saint. She's moved many times with me for the government, never wanted to go to the places we went, but she went. My daughter had a full ride scholarship to the Cronkite School of Journalism back then. She didn't feel safe staying, so she walked away from an $82,000 scholarship that we, in addition to losing money on the house, mind you, over $200,000 we lost on a house. So it crippled us. And then there were times where we'd go to dinner and people would be kind of, I wasn't sure who they were. It could FBI, OIG, private investigators hired by whoever were following us. So we'd sit down for dinner and be surveilled. And it's like, all right, we got to go. So here you're sitting down with your wife and two kids who are, in their late teens. And you're like, all right, food hasn't come yet, but I still have to pay the check. Go wait for me in the car. Those were horrible memories, and it was a very uncomfortable experience to live through. But, again,
the fact that you were an agent protecting our country,
telling the truth,
and telling the truth. And this is what people don't get. When the truth comes out, the knives come out. And those who fight the people who want to tell the truth, they're going to bring them down, however, and how dirty and how ugly, and hit their families and whatever to protect themselves. I'm sorry, that's just the government now. And it's gotten uglier.
Yeah,
so
and this was over 10 years ago, as a reminder to people.
Exactly. It's just it keeps on getting worse and worse. So my question is, with now, I mean, it was John, then you came. There were other whistleblowers, but the two of you were the main whistleblowers, correct? You have other people. I know that Jay came in and other people came in, but you sharing your story, especially with the book, Deadly Path, I love this, of understanding that the truth has to be told.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, John was the first one, and then there were other people from that group. Because again, the people that weren't in that group didn't know what was happening there. I didn't know till we put the puzzle pieces together after Brian's death. But so John came forward, and then Larry Alt and Lee Casa, who were in that group, so they saw what was happening firsthand. They came forward, each at risk to themselves, and each paid a price for it. And then even in Mexico, Darren Gill, who was an attaché down there, and then the gentleman that followed Darren was Carlos Canino. They came forward and testified. Jose Wall, who worked for me in Phoenix, again, interdicting the guns, doing everything right. Great guy. Jose came forward. He was close to retirement age and retired shortly after. I mean, so people did come forward. And then the other myth is like no one in ATF was held accountable. Nobody was fired. That's not true either. Bill McMahon lost his job. Bill was with me when the North Tower fell. He was my boss in New York. He was the head of the West region. So he was in headquarters. Bill and a lot of the people above him, their crime was trusting Bill Newell and the boots on the ground to do the right thing and not staying on top of things and not taking ownership when stuff went south. Same thing, and what some folks say is, hey, Pete, when you testified, you took the case from an ATF scandal to a DOJ scandal because I talked about the U.S. Attorney's Office's involvement, which kind of dumped it into Holder's lap a lot more so than if it was just an ATF scandal. But the reality is that there were a lot of architects of Fast and Furious. I would argue that the prosecutors' hands were bloodier than some of the ATF agents' hands because I'll give you an example.
Amen.
There was one instance where Scottsdale Gun Club, which is a great place. Yeah, good people. They were great Americans, and they would the same thing. If they saw something suspicious, they would call us. There was an instance where there was a straw purchase that happened there, and the people involved in Operation Fast and Furious are sitting outside, and the straw purchasers see them and think, wow, these people might be looking to rip us off. So they call the Scottsdale police, right? Unbeknownst to the Scottsdale police show up, escort the straw buyers from the scene, right? And let them ride off into the sunset thinking they're legitimate buyers because they're not prohibited. They're straw purchases. They pass the background check. And ATF never tells Scottsdale, hey, by the way, that was us. So, I mean, here you have, again, not to the, not blaming Scottsdale Gun Club or Scottsdale Police because they did things that looked.
They didn't have the communication.
Right. So anyway, that was something where I discussed with the case agent much later. It's like, hey, why didn't you stop these cars? And her response to me was, and look, I believe her because it was similar to what I dealt with for the years before that is we would call 𝑀𝒉𝒆, who was the prosecutor, and he would say, yeah, I understand that this guy bought whatever 100 guns before, but how do we prove that this particular purchase isn't for himself? Let him go. So you had in many instances, plenty of opportunities for them to interdict guns, and they didn't. So, like, that might sound like, hey, Pete's making an excuse for the ATF agents. No, absolutely not. Because when 𝑀𝒉𝒆 said no, they could have went to the county, they could have went to the state, or they could have not asked 𝑀𝒉𝒆 for permission to stop a car and seize a gun. I never called up and said, hey, do I have probable cause? You're a cop. You should know.
You do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Right. So, it was a disaster, and it went on, and over 2,000 guns walked. I believe last I heard around 800 have been recovered. But the truth is, these aren't loaves of bread. They're not potatoes. They're not, apples. They don't rot. They're going to be out there probably turning up at crime scenes long after all of us are gone. And when you look at the carnage in Mexico, it's unforgivable. But then there's another little dynamic to this that came up very recently. The government of Mexico is now suing the firearms industry for the flood of guns into Mexico. Well, guess what? First off, Mexican aduana does not stop cars full of guns going south if the plaza boss tells them not to stop that particular car.
Right.
So, Mexico itself has a hand in this. Their aduana people are not armed, and they don't want to get slaughtered by the cartel. And I'm not going to say I completely blame them, right? But then you have Fast and Furious, where they tell the dealers, hey, keep selling, right? You have prosecutors that won't prosecute straw buyers, and that's not something that's exclusive to Arizona. Some districts are very good, right? Some are horrible. So why isn't Mexico suing the Department of Justice? Why are they suing an industry that more often than not gave us the tips that led to us creating cases other than Fast and Furious, where we were doing the right thing, seizing guns, trying to put people in jail, and at the same time protecting the Second Amendment rights of people who weren't criminals? Because I'll give you another example, because I want people to understand this. There were times where we would have a tip from a dealer on a guy who wanted to buy a gun that was clearly a straw purchase. And we would follow that person with the gun till we felt it was time to stop them. Never did we let it ride off into the sunset. Never did we not do that. And there were times where we would follow a guy from one dealer to another dealer. And again, the dealers were talking to us. And then
Right.
we would watch them do a transaction in a parking lot. Right. And we would stop
Mhm.
that person that sold the gun in the parking lot because it wasn't a dealer. We didn't know who they were. And more often than not, it was like, hey, man, I put my gun up. And legally, you can do this, at least at the time in Arizona, on Craigslist. And the guy
Right.
said he wanted to meet me here because I didn't know I was selling to, a person who shouldn't have it. He said he could pass the background check. He could. He was a straw buyer. And so we would not, we would get their name. We would let them keep the money that they made in the transaction because they weren't breaking any law that, that they knew of. So we could have seized that as evidence, saying, all right, pal, you should have sold the gun to him. You should have known better. Give me that $600. We didn't do that because they were enjoying their Second Amendment privilege, selling a gun to someone that they thought could have it. And we figured if we don't take the money from them and we just get their name and treat them with respect, they'll make a good witness if the case ever goes to trial. But again, in all of these
Yeah.
instances, for the most part, no one was getting charged unless the Arizona Attorney General did it, or the Maricopa County, or whatever other county, if the stop happened in Yuma, for example, or in the rare instances where the U.S. Attorney's Office would say, okay, for some reason they would want it and they would take it, which was the exception rather than the rule. I'd say 90% of the times they told us no, the U.S. Attorney's Office.
God, that's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, truthfully, like I can't wrap my brain around the illogical approach. And truthfully, just even as saying that in my out loud voice of like, this was 10 years ago and more.
It's not
And to
better.
think where it is, to think where it is today actually terrifies me. I'm not
Yeah.
going to lie. And the fact that the Mexican government is suing us, of course they are. Like, why wouldn't they? I mean,
Because they can.
it is almost as if poking fun at us. Like they have to be laughing their asses off at what's happened and what they've gotten away with. And I don't think people really get that fact of, these weapons are in the hands of people we'll never know who have them. And you're right. It's not like they're going to go away or they're going to expire sometime soon. They're out there and we provided them
Mhm.
and we purposefully didn't stop them.
Right.
Like that it's so mind-blowing and also terrifying. And the reason, of course, when I was saying at the very beginning, just how this was such a special, union of us three for so many reasons. But being an Arizona girl and just watching your other podcasts that you've done, and I will give a shout out to Tom and Dan of Gold Shields, because that was one of the first ones I saw you on. It is people just don't have an understanding, and they want to bitch, piss, and moan about weapons and taking guns out of the hands of citizens. People, this is not going to change the bad people who have the guns in their hands, and they will never be traced to having those weapons. We'll never know who has them.
Until
And
they show
as
up at a crime scene. Yeah.
yeah, and until you can do any kind of tracking, if they leave the weapon there, which the odds are not. And it's kind of, interesting when I first moved to Arizona, and I remember I went to ASU, go Devils. My mom, we were in a store and there was a huge sign that said, check your weapons at the counter. And my mom was like, where in the hell am I leaving my daughter? And it is a different thing when you can see people carrying weapons, but of course it is what you're used to. But I know many people just over the last, and I'll even say 5 years, how many people have bought as much ammunition and as many weapons as they possibly could because of what's happening in the world. And just knowing what's happened here locally, and the point I was trying to make at the beginning, being in Arizona and knowing Brian Terry, and I have friends who are police officers, I never knew all of this stuff until listening to your other podcasts and hearing your story. I had no clue that all of these things were, it makes sense. And I had assumptions of certain things, but that's terrifying at the power that is out there to keep us in the dark of what is actually going on literally in our backyard. Like that's terrifying. And I guess sort of, what with all of this, because of course, what a terrible experience to have to go through. And seriously, God bless you, because after everything you'd already been through 9/11, it just goes without saying, like, wow. When did you finally say enough is enough and I've got to go?
Go where to for?
Just leave Phoenix.
Retire
Oh,
You said you,
well,
you say, yeah, I'm out.
yeah. What happened was after blowing, like as a group supervisor, your job is to lead your people, right? So you're
Yeah.
approving ops plans, you're going out there covering deals with them, but it's also to be the intermediary with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Once those emails
Yeah.
started coming out, and I was getting phone calls from prosecutors saying, "Hey, man, watch your back." That ability went away. So for a short time, I was benched, partially with my concurrence. Like because I couldn't be that advocate. I don't want to get one of my people jammed up
Right.
as a way for them to get back at me, right? So I spent some time
Right.
sitting in a cubicle with no responsibilities other than like I was by that time the senior, the longest tenured first line supervisor there. So I would have other bosses come up to me like asking for guidance. So I was like, I was mentoring a little bit, I guess you could say, providing some advisement. But eventually, it was a decision was made. Hey, man, you should probably get out of Arizona, and it was the smart decision. So I went to headquarters for a little while. Then I went up to Canada for a couple of years, which let me tell you, working with Canadian cops was an amazing highlight of my career. I love Canadian cops, good, solid
Right.
people. Reminded me of the cops I started with in the 80s and 90s in New York. But I was still under investigation by the OIG because the U.S. Attorney's Office was alleging that I lied about the declinations and some other things. So I didn't actually clear my name and get out from under the foot of DOJ till years later. So it's like late 2000, I think almost 2015 when the OIG reports finally came out on the Fast and Furious. And there was another case that we were working with a guy who was making grenades for the Sinaloa cartel that the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't charge. When all the dust settled and my name was cleared, I was finally able to go back and just focus on the job. And even by that point yet, I still had not dealt with PTSD or my mental health yet. But so it was nice to be able to focus on the job and not have to spend half my time focusing on the job and then the other half of the time fighting to clear my name, which is it's draining, when you're trying to, because I was telling the OIG the same, hey man, this is what I'm telling you. Like, well, the U.S. Attorney's Office says otherwise.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I was like, hey man, I'll tell you what, polygraph me. 6 different times I volunteered, put me on a box, which you don't do as a federal agent. Because if you fail a polygraph, they can pull your clearance, and polygraphs aren't the most accurate devices. So, I mean, I was taking a gamble, but I was putting my faith in the fact that, hey, I'm telling the truth and I'm not going to shut up and I'm not going to let them put me in a corner because I have witnesses, I have documents, I'll take a polygraph. So it was something to behold. And
did they let you do the polygraphs? You said 6 times.
No, every time the DOJ investigators would be like, Pete, no, that's not necessary. Which you wonder why? Why? I'm saying, I'll put me on the box.
Right.
Why do you not want to know definitively?
Right.
It was something else. And it was literally when the final OIG report came out. Again, going back to not being political. I remember
it's hard not to, Pete. It's really hard not to be political.
I get it. But I remember speaking to Tom Brandon, who was now the deputy director, and telling him, Tom, the OIG's report's coming out. I'm going to discuss it openly with Congress. He's like, hey, man, Pete, do what you got to do. Watch out, DOJ. Don't trust them. Do it on your time. So I had to take a day off. And I wound up literally sitting on a park bench at the Capitol building, right? Because the OIG tells you the report was going to come out on noon. And it was a certain day, if I'm not mistaken, in October of 2014. Yeah, I think it was 14. So I called Grassley's office, ICE's office, Cummings's office, and Leahy's office saying the report's going to drop. I'll meet you all. We can go over it line by line. Lo and behold, Leahy's people still didn't respond. And I even tried to have the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association call him. Figured maybe he'll talk to them. Same thing. Cummings was supportive verbally, but did not get involved. Right. ISA and Grassley staff met me, and then John McCain's staff also came, and we went over that report line by line. And look, I made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. I owned all my mistakes there. But in the end, they basically issued a letter to the DOJ basically saying, how dare you throw an agent under the bus to protect your lawyers? Because you can't fix what you're not going to talk about. And in doing that, I couldn't say I got it perfect where I made mistakes. Like an example was one of the surveillances, my agents wanted to trust electronic devices to watch a guy's house. And I'm old school. I wanted a body on the block, right? So I said, nope, I want a body on the block. But what do you think happened?
They figured out you were there.
The target spotted the agent, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of ruined our ability to watch that guy for a little bit. That was my mistake. So I wasn't going to sit there and say, dance around. I made that decision. It was the wrong decision. I should have trusted the technology and my younger agents, because I don't know everything. So like things like that, I'll own, because you can't fix, again, what you're not going to talk about. But I mean, just some of the allegations that came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office were blatant, bold-faced, demonstrably false lies. And they clung to them.
So where is it standing now? Because I know that the Terry family, nothing's really, they're still waiting.
Well, I got my first batch of books.
Yay!
Hey.
Exciting.
And I took the first 3 out of the box, and I sat there. Excuse me.
I can feel that.
Yeah, amen.
I signed it for Brian's brother and sisters.
To Kent.
Because they deserve to know.
Really, yep.
And look, he was a hero who died serving his country.
Yeah.
And all they asked for, because they were decent people, was answers. And they never got them.
No.
So I hope they get some answers out of the book.
Oh, God bless you. I mean, and my heart, and those are the things about these things that get swept under the rug, the collateral damage, that poor family. I mean, truthfully, I can't even begin to imagine, but what a blessing for you to be able to do that for them. And really, just show you're such an incredible man for standing up in the truth. I mean, honestly, because a lot of people would have backed down, but I do want to say, how has it been now that you've been talking about the book? Are you getting any backlash from anyone?
No, and have you dealt with your PTSD?
Well, let's go with the book. Well, let's go with the book first. And I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but when you write a book about stuff that happened in your time with an organization, they get a vote basically saying what they would like you to take out of the book. So I was expecting to be told by some, I don't want to get this ATF attorney in trouble, but I was expecting to be told to redact things. I wasn't. They asked me to the director of ATF at the time was a guy named Ken Melson. He was asked to go talk to Congress. DOJ said no. He went anyway, and he was honest with them, because I heard from the congressionals. He laid everything on the table. He did it on July 4th, which was a holiday, because he didn't have his bodyguard detail with him. So I was asked, hey, can you check? We don't think the director would have went in on July 4th. He did, and he told the truth. So to him, I will give him props and show him respect for stepping up and owning the mistakes that the agency had. So, that was the only thing. They didn't ask me to redact the name because, again, there's evidence, there's witnesses. So I was shocked that they were like, that was the only thing that they asked me to do. Sorry. As for the PTSD, it was much later in 2018 when I had the lung cancer. And, I remember coming out of my anesthesia, and it was around the same time that a book came out about a case that I had worked as a detective. This guy named Jonathan Green wrote a book about this case called Sex, Money, Murder. He had interviewed me many, many years earlier. He interviewed me in like 2013. So 5 years later, this book comes out. And I remember saying to myself, here I'm coming out of anesthesia. I see my wife and my daughter, right? They're a mess. I'm a mess. I have tubes coming out of God everywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, my legacy is a stupid book about a case I worked. And the book's a great book. I'm not, but I'm like, I didn't have the memories that I had with my family of the memories of the great cases that I worked over the years. And I'm like, what an asshole. Like, here I am. I'm looking at my wife again. I don't know at the time if I had metastasis yet. Am I going to live? Like, what's my prognosis long-term? My son was away. He was working with the Coast Guard. So he was out, doing duties with the Coast Guard. And I'm just saying, man, it's time for me to stop. I came into this profession whole. I'm fucking leaving whole. So it was that point saying, I need to get the help that I need. And I need to start making the memories with my family that I never made, because I was so into the job and so into not missing the big foot chase or not missing that big deal, or God forbid there was a shooting and somebody else got hurt. I needed to be there to help them. So you get so caught up in the profession that you sometimes lose yourself. And it was at that point where I said, something, I'm getting close to where I'm going to have to retire, because federal agents have a mandatory retirement age. I'm not whole anymore. I lost a lung because of my duties here. I didn't have those memories. It was time to just make it right. And it was funny because it was actually a guy who teaches meditation in Florida. His name's Anthony Profeta. He's a former doctor well, he graduated med school, but never became a doctor. He didn't like the profession, thought it was somewhat corrupt because how they push medications, and you prescribe enough of this shit, you get a Lamborghini. So
No,
he decided, he decided to take up meditation, and now he teaches meditation. And at the time, my blood pressure was like stroke level because the cancer and all the other shit going on. And he talked me into meditating and being more mindful, and things started to get in check. And in fact, my blood pressure now is low without ever taking a single pill. But that's when I said, something, I'm going to leave here with my mind whole, and then started to take the steps to do that. So look, my family missed out on over 30 years of having their husband or father around, like where I was literally there and not lost in my head. And now I'm trying to make up for lost time.
And how is that?
It's excellent. It's excellent.
So I always ask, do you feel that you going through everything that you went through to get where you are, going through it, not over, to get where you are, where you're it seems like you're more of in a peaceful place, that, your family life is doing well. You have all the experience, you've worked on the PTSD, and you do understand that you have helped so many people in this country. And so honor that. But do you feel that there was, we're both, Kelly and I, our faith is very strong. We're both believers that sometimes we have to go through a lot of fucking shit to get to the other side, to understand that, wow, if we hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be where I am today. So instead of going, beating ourselves up, like wasn't around or didn't do this, or I shouldn't have done this, or getting in our head, hanging out and everything. So do you feel that that's, and then writing the book of being able to share the story so that everybody else can see it, and just gifting it to the family?
Well, I feel that I survived that day, and I survived all I've been through for a reason. And that reason was to be true to myself, and to be true to my beliefs, and to be true to my family. And look, the oath I took to become a cop, that I had to take again when we merged with the NYPD, that I took again when I became an ATF agent, and then I took again every time I graduated a class when I was the head of training for ATF at the end, I would take the oath with them. It doesn't come with an expiration date, right? So, I find now peace in helping coach the next generation of law enforcement when folks call on me to do that, to talk about 9/11, which for decades I couldn't set foot on that ground. Now I go there and speak from time to time, a few times a year as a volunteer. And look, the reality of why I wrote this book was because, towards the end, what happened should never happen again. And when you look at how all policing principles were abandoned to facilitate Operation Fast and Furious, you realize it could happen again. And even at the end, when I would suggest, hey, why don't we put together a training for new agents about Fast and Furious, I was always told, no, we don't talk about Fast and Furious. And even when I wrote the book, it's funny, I had an agent from somewhere in the Midwest recently say, hey, thanks for writing the book. I can't wait to get my hands on it, because we don't know what happened during Fast and Furious. And so I was like, well, when did you get hired? He was around with ATF at the time. And I met new agents coming into the academy who would say the same thing. So I was like, well, what do you mean you don't know? He goes, Pete, anytime we talked about Operation Fast and Furious, we were told, don't talk about it like it's Voldemort. So I was like, all right, first thing I had to do was look up what the fuck is Voldemort. And I found out it's from Harry Potter or something like that. I had no idea. I guess yeah, you can't mention it. So, but I mean, that's the reality is that people that weren't working in Phoenix in that group don't know what really happened in that group. I knew a little bit more because I was a supervisor in an adjacent group in another building, but I mean, the people that worked in other parts of the country don't know what happened there. So, I mean, how do you prevent something from happening again if you don't know what happened the first time? So that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. The other reason, to be completely candid, is, like I said before, some ATF people lost their jobs, not all that deserved it. The penalties weren't fair. A lot of, but none of the attorneys that were directly involved were touched. So it's time for them to be held accountable, even if it's in a book. And then, look, I'm not going to lie. If the book sells, it would be nice to make back some of that money I paid in lawyers' bills. But I mean, that's not the primary thing. And look, most books don't make a lot of money. Most books, you're lucky if you break even. So we'll see what happens. But it was a story that I thought,
us, we have a voice. We're definitely going to be putting that out.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
but
And
that's
I
it.
would think the book would have to have been very cathartic and, for you for so many reasons, and truly, what a gift. And man, I'm the crier, so I'm probably gonna cry again, so I apologize, but man, just giving the peace to that family.
I
To
hope.
me,
I
that's like
hope.
that alone was worth it. Like anything else is a bonus. And sharing your journey and where you've come, and Christy and I talk, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to do this show, and specifically talking about first responders and our veterans, is the amount of things that you all go through, and and don't realize until later, like, man, I had some shit I needed to deal with. That it helps others to be like, oh, it's so great to hear him talk about this because I'm feeling something. As many resources that are available these days to younger folks coming on, there's still a stigma that's attached to it because you're a pansy if you need help, which is a bunch of crap. So I think it just so helps when they hear from senior people like yourself. And I don't mean age wise, but hearing it's how it's changed your life, and then what a blessing for you to be able to share all that. And I know we're like actually over the hour, and and we could of course, as usual, continue to talk.
Yep.
But as we do wrap, and I'll share all the links to the book, to Pete's website. Do order your personalized autograph copy from his website. And it's still a pre-order because it's coming out on March 5th. We'll share all the links that we talked about. But as we do wrap, do you have any final thoughts to share, Pete? And you've already shared how we can help you, because I agree with you. You know what? Get the book. First of all, you need to know this story, all of it that happens, because there's so much more. And it doesn't just happen in Arizona, people.
No.
This is just the
No.
tip of the iceberg. So just be real. And when we say knowledge is power, you need to know these things. Don't listen to this crap that we're being fed. This is the reality. These are the people that were the boots on the ground. So I will stop there. And just final thoughts for you, Pete, as we wrap.
Sure, sure. Well, look, ATF, I love the organization. When they get it wrong, I think they go into the what's the old mantra? Go big or go home. But
Mhm.
for the most part, I'm proud of the work that we did. And don't judge the agency by the misdeeds of some, because it's a great
Yeah.
organization, and in many parts of the country, they're keeping people safe from gun violence. And I get it; they make
Yeah.
mistakes. So does every other organization. That's one.
Right.
The other things is, look, you nailed it. There was a stigma with asking for help. There shouldn't be anymore. I spent over 2 decades not being there mentally. The job's going to forget you the minute you leave. And I know this. I saw it happen. My old office doesn't look like anything like it looked in the old days. So what I say is, you're expected to give 100% of your effort, at work. If you're a law enforcement officer, I expect that of you too. That doesn't mean you should give it 100% of your time. So when you're not at work, you should be giving that effort to your family, because in the
Yeah.
end, that's it. And the other thing is, the truth is an important weapon, right? It's valuable. Stick to the truth. Fight for the truth, because in the end, look, the only thing we take to the graves with us, right? It's not badges, guns. It's not medals or any of that crap. It's our reputation. So be a
Absolutely.
good person, be a good
Amen.
human being, and then that's how people will remember you. But I mean, if you're not going to do that and people think otherwise, that's on you, not on them. So just always be the best person that you can be. And we're all on this planet for a reason. Hopefully, it's a good one.
Amen.
I just every time I think of it, and I think it's A Few Good Men. You Can't Handle the Truth. Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah, that's right.
who is the actor?
Jack
Jack
Nicholson.
It was Jack Nicholson. But it's just like people can't handle the truth, but we have to stand in our truth. We have to show what the truth is.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, people don't like to have the truth, because then they have to take their blinders off.
Well, the
And then they have to
reality
be
is,
accountable.
in government, and it's not just federal government, is for some people, they'll say anything to get to that next promotion or that
Of
next
course.
pay grade.
Yeah.
And that's why the reputation at the end is really what matters, because it doesn't care if you're the director of an agency or you retire as a special agent or a police officer, whatever. In the end, what people think of you is all that matters. Your title ends when you leave the organization.
That's
Absolutely.
right. Totally agree. And I do want to emphasize and reiterate what Pete said too. there's bad actors and bad people in every industry and every organization, every institution that exists. So we're not saying that
We just
because
don't hang out with them.
yeah, no, I don't.
Good.
But these bad people do not make the rest of them bad people, because there are good people, and Pete is a prime example of that, because he stood in the truth and never gave up on it. And God bless you for that.
Thank you.
Truthfully, everyone needs to hashtag be more like Pete. I'm just saying.
No,
Uh,
please. That's
in
no,
the
just-
truth part, we'll leave those other stories to the side. In the truth, and God bless you, man. We can't thank you enough for your time. And again, we'll share all the links in the comments as well as in the post promos. And if you have any additional questions, please do feel free to reach out. Do connect with Pete on social media. He is here on LinkedIn, as well as on, he's gotten on other social media, Facebook and such, since the book.
yeah.
So do feel free to reach out there as well. And thank you everyone for joining us today. This has just been another example of we are all on this journey together, and together we do make it awesome. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone.